Hello, I am Peter Okwoche. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. The prosecutor at the International Criminal Court is barred from entering the United States over her probe into U.S. actions in Afghanistan.
These visa restrictions will not be the end of our efforts. We're prepared to take additional steps, including economic sanctions if the ICC does not change its course.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres urges a political solution to the growing crisis in Libya after the leader of the forces in the east ordered troops to march on the capital. 25 years on, we hear the heartbreaking stories of children who lost parents in the Rwandan genocide.
I saw him under a bridge, raising his hands and trying to suckle from his mother. But she was dead, and he was covered in blood.
Also on the program, fighting the politics of patriarchy. The women rising up against the regime of Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir.
There are certain ideas that we need to fix, like that girls should stay at home while men protect and provide for them, or that men should go out on the streets, but we should not.
And in sports, a big game as Simba of Tanzania prepare to take on five-time champions TP Mazembe of the DR Congo in the African Champions League quarterfinals. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The United States has revoked the entry visa for the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda. Last month, the U.S. warned it might refuse visas to any ICC staff involved in probes into allegations of war crimes in Afghanistan. In a moment, we'll be speaking to our correspondent Anna Holligan, who's at the ICC at The Hague. But first, a reminder of what U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said.
If you're responsible for the proposed ICC investigation of U.S. personnel in connection with the situation in Afghanistan, you should not assume that you will still have or will get a visa, or that you will be permitted to enter the United States. The United States will implement these measures consistent with applicable law, including our obligations under the United Nations Headquarters Agreement. These visa restrictions will not be the end of our efforts. We're prepared to take additional steps, including economic sanctions if the ICC does not change its course.
Well, let's join Anna Holligan at The Hague now. Anna, how did we get here?
Well, Peter, it looks as though the repercussions may be coming before the actual decision because, of course, the prosecutor here at the ICC, Fatou Bensouda, has still got to make a decision as to whether there is enough evidence to launch a full-blown investigation into the case of US military personnel in Afghanistan. You might remember in 2016, the ICC released a report which said there was evidence to suggest US military personnel had been responsible for torture, not just in Afghanistan, but also at these secret so-called rendition black sites run by the CIA in countries including Poland, Lithuania, and Romania, and crucially, of course, those countries are members of the ICC. Now, the prosecutor still has to decide whether or not to take this further, and if she were to launch an investigation, she would require the judge's permission to do that first.
And has there been any reaction at all from the ICC and indeed Fatou Bensouda?
Absolutely, from the ICC. I think the biggest fear here in The Hague is that other countries may follow suit because, of course, this court relies on the cooperation of member states. The US, along with Russia, China and others, is not a member, but it could set an example to others, for example, in Africa who have raised objections to the work of this court in the past. The ICC has responded saying that Fatou Bensouda will continue her work without fear or favour and with the utmost professionalism. And they also believe that she should still be able to travel to the United States despite this visa restriction on a diplomatic visa in order to continue her work at the UN.
And you just mentioned those African leaders who have kicked against the ICC in the past. Will they be looking at this statement now and telling the ICC, well, we told you so?
There's always a danger that anything that happens politically will be felt here in The Hague. But what the judges and what the prosecutor's office will always say is that their decisions are led by the evidence rather than influenced by the politics. But this court doesn't have a police force. So looking far ahead into the future, it could be the case if the court decides that there is enough evidence to go ahead with an investigation and decides to indict the highest members of the US military, it could be that there is a situation in the future similar to that of the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who has simply been a fugitive from justice here at the ICC for years. And I think it was really interesting what one human rights activist said, that in trying to frustrate, so essentially obstruct the course of justice, what the US authorities have proved is that they fear this test of justice. And we, of course, will continue to watch this one.
Anna Holligan at The Hague, thank you very much. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of the Algerian capital demanding a complete overhaul of the country's political system. That's after the country's long-standing president Abdelaziz Bouteflika stood down earlier in the week. There are reports his close ally, the head of intelligence, has been sacked. Nigeria's president has said his country loses $1.1 billion every year to medical tourism. Muhammadu Buhari blamed inadequacies in the public health system and mass migration of medical personnel out of the country. Mr. Buhari made several trips at his own expense to the UK for treatment, which resulted in heavy criticism. In a rare admission, the US military has acknowledged it killed 2 civilians in an airstrike in Somalia last year. US Africa Command said a strike near the town of Il Bur had killed 2 civilians and 4 militants, not 5 militants as originally reported. The number of strikes has increased sharply in recent months. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for all military movements to stop in Libya. Mr. Guterres has been meeting the leader of the forces in eastern Libya, General Khalifa, who yesterday ordered troops to march on the capital, Tripoli. His forces control some parts of the country, while Tripoli is the base of the internationally recognized government. Victoria Owahunda reports.
A night almost like any other in Tripoli. Inhabitants are going about their business. But behind the apparent calm lies worry. Commander Khalifa Haftar, based in the east in Benghazi, had ordered his troops to take control of Tripoli. The Libyan National Army forces on Thursday took Garian, about 80 kilometers south of Tripoli.
The forces were moving forward from one location to another in order to liberate the country from terrorists, criminals and mercenaries.
But they were temporarily pushed back this morning. The Prime Minister, Fayez El-Sarraj, has called on militias to defend Tripoli. He visited a checkpoint outside the city following clashes. Since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, Libya has been in chaos. 2 rival authorities now fight for control. In Tripoli, the so-called National Unity Government, internationally recognized and headed by Fayez al-Sarraj. In Benghazi, the parallel authority of Haftar's Libyan National Army, backed by Egypt and the United Arab Emirates. Moves on the ground have alarmed the international community. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres flew to Benghazi on Friday morning to meet Commander Haftar.
Very clearly, our business in not escalation is de-escalation. And I strongly hope that we will witness a de-escalation, both military and verbal, allowing for the recognition that Libya needs a political solution, not a military one.
Mr. Guterres was already in Libya to finalize plans for a reconciliation national conference in mid-April, leading to possible elections. The international community continues to hope for a solution through the ballot box, not through weapons. Victoria Owahunda, BBC News.
This weekend marks the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, when 800,000 people, mostly Tutsis and moderate Hutus, were killed. But Tensions between the ethnic groups in the East African country started long before, under Belgian colonial rule, which favored the minority Tutsis. In 1959, the Hutus rose up and overthrew the Tutsi monarchy, and tens of thousands of Tutsis fled to neighboring countries, including Uganda. 30 years later, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, made up of mainly exiled Tutsis, amongst them Paul Kagame, the current Rwandan president, launched a first attack on Rwanda from Uganda. In 1993, after several attacks and months of negotiations, a peace accord was signed between President Juvenal Habyarimana of the RPF, but it did little to stop the continued unrest. On the night of April the 6th, a year later, a plane carrying President Habyarimana and his Burundian counterpart Cyprien Ntaryamira, both Hutus, was shot down, killing everyone on board, sparking violence that many see as the catalyst of the genocide. Well, those killings left tens of thousands of children orphaned. The BBC's Ferdinand Omondi is in Kigali and has met some of them, now grown up, and trying to make sense out of their country's history.
These are the only memories that Aline has of her mother and father. At the mention of the word death, Aline instantly thinks of them. Her parents died during the 1994 genocide when she was just 1 year old.
Okay, this is my father's grave. That's one. And that one in the middle is my mother's grave. The killers came at home. My parents were killed, and I'm sleeping just beside them.
Have you forgiven them?
To have peace in my heart, I decided to forgive them. I said that when I was young, and till now. Yeah, just my mother.
Aline says life was hard. She currently lives with her cousin, whose parents were also killed 25 years ago, in a house provided for by the state for genocide survivors. Her tenacity kept her going, and she made it to university, where she is now studying for her master's. She also devotes time to learn as much as she can about the genocide and understand what happened to her family. Many of those who were killed in the Rwanda genocide were buried in mass graves. Here at the Kigali Memorial, more than 250,000 people are buried. It's a place that honors the memories of the dead, but also provides crucial lessons about the past for the sake of the present and the future. The UN estimates that more than 95,000 children were orphaned and around 300,000 children were killed. Oswald doesn't know if any of his relatives are still alive. He was saved from the jaws of death as a baby, although he was unaware of this until he was older. Oswald struggles to explain his past, so he offers to take us to the woman who saved his life and whom he now calls Mom. Josephine is a Hutu who risked her life to save Oswald, a Tutsi baby.
I saw him under a bridge, raising his hands and trying to suckle from his mother. But she was dead, and he was covered in blood. I looked right and left to see if anyone was watching. Saving him would be dangerous for me, but I saw to save him at any cost. I thank God because even though we lived under difficult circumstances, He has taken care of us.
The children of the genocide may not remember firsthand the horrors of 25 years ago, and many of them now want a future that will brighten and cover the deep, dark shadows of the past. Ferdinand Mondi, BBC News, Kigali, Rwanda.
Staying with that story, France's President Emmanuel Macron has launched an investigation into the role of the French army in Rwanda. Experts are expected to deliver their findings in 2 years' time. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame has accused France of being complicit in the violence, while French authorities have repeatedly dismissed accusations that it trained militia to take part in the massacre. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come, Mimi with all the sports. We catch up with the former Nigerian captain Joseph Yobo about the Super Eagles' chances at the Africa Cup of Nations this year. I'm Peter Okwoche. The top stories this hour. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda, has had her United States entry visa revoked. She's been investigating alleged war crimes by US forces and their allies in Afghanistan. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says talks in Libya have ended without resolution after the country's most powerful military commander reportedly says he won't abandon plans to march on the capital. The father of one of the pilots of the Ethiopian Airlines plane that crashed last month has paid tribute to his son. Yared Getachew says he's proud of how he tried hard to stop the accident. Yesterday, a preliminary report said both crew members repeatedly followed all the correct emergency procedures. Dr. Getachew Tesema spoke to the BBC's Emmanuel Igunza.
It was very difficult to imagine.
Your son did everything he could as set up by the manufacturer to try and save the plane. What are your thoughts about that report?
I am very proud about my son or the other pilot, both of them. Until the last minute, they have struggled as much as they can. But unfortunately, they were not able to stop it. I don't regret it very much that he was a pilot. He died in the course of the duty, his duty.
Are you blaming Boeing for the accident?
I do, very much. I do very much, yes. Because why couldn't they stop it after the first accident happened in Indonesia? Why they let them to fly?
The opposition in Sudan has called for mass demonstrations this weekend to remove the government of President Omar al-Bashir. He's ruled the African nation since taking power in a military coup 30 years ago. Dozens have been killed and thousands have been detained in what protests which began after bread prices rose sharply earlier this year. Many of those at the forefront are young women fighting to create a new society, as Fergal Keane now reports.
The women of Al-Afad University facing the regime's police. The men with guns drive past repeatedly, but the women stand firm. And that kind of courage is everywhere these days. Asil Diab is a celebrated Sudanese artist, but she's using her talent to protest, painting the faces of the detained on the walls of Khartoum.
This art reaches many people, whether they're walking or driving. All of them look. They can see the character, and if they don't know who it is, they ask, so people keep talking about it.
Women have faced severe repression under the regime's version of Islamic law. Now as many as 2/3 of demonstrators are female. This woman hurling tear gas back at the police. For others like Wifak Qureshi, who started as a student activist 6 years ago, the aim isn't just to remove the regime, but the entire politics of patriarchy.
There are certain ideas that we need to fix, like that girls should stay at home while men protect and provide for them, or that men should go out on the streets but we should not. This was one of the things I protested for, and I think it is changing a lot now.
The road to change was opened by economic crisis. After 30 years in power, the Bashir regime has failed to deliver jobs or prosperity, and soaring inflation alienated the middle classes, whose children took to the streets.
The economic situation is so bad that even people from middle class, even affluent families, found it hard to maintain their daily bread. And so when they reached that level of desperation, they became equal with the poor and the working classes and had nothing to lose.
With Bashir still firmly in control of the security forces, it doesn't look as if the new Sudan will be born anytime soon. But what is significant is that the experience of brutality, of witnessing what's happening to others, has traumatized, but also deepened the determination of the protesters.
This is something truly sad. If you don't believe truly in what you do, it is hard to go on. If you don't believe, then you will feel it is okay to just stand by and watch them beat people. When you see a man is being beaten, I don't think you would cross your arms and just watch.
Whether or not they remove the regime soon, the women of Sudan have already achieved fundamental change in how their society sees them, in how they see themselves. Fergal Keane, BBC News.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi?
Thank you very much, Peter. Now, this weekend sees the first leg of the quarterfinals of the African Champions League. And the resurgence of the East African teams continues with a big game. Simba of Tanzania hosts five-time champions TP Mazembe of DR Congo. But Simba's coach Patrick Osem is confident of victory in Dar es Salaam, having won all 5 of their home games this season.
You know that for Simba from Tanzania, it's a big event because it's a long time that Simba didn't reach this level. It was already the case with the group stage, and now we are in quarterfinal. We face, I think, the best African team of the last 6-7 years. So it will be a very tough game, but we are confident. We are at home, and with the support of our fans, I think that everything is possible.
To the English Premier League, where Liverpool could go back to the top of the table if they get a win against Southampton today. Liverpool's Senegal star Sadio Mane has been in great form and will be looking to add to his tally of goals. Egyptian star Mohamed Salah hasn't scored for the club now in 8 matches, but Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp says he's not worried. And now the Africa Cup of Nations kicks off this June in Egypt, and former Nigeria captain Joseph Yobo, who was the first man to reach 100 caps, says that Super Eagles are one of the favorites to win their tournament. He spoke to Nigerian journalist Oluwashino Okeleji and began by telling him how they weren't one of the favorites when they won in 2013.
From my experience as a former captain, no one gave us a chance in 2013, including myself when the squad was released. I told the coach, I said, there are not enough experienced players in this team. So we had more younger players in the team, made with very few experienced players. But here we go, we won it. I've been in a team where we have very good squad. We were like one of the top 2s to go win it, and we didn't get it. So going back to what is happening with this squad, with what I'm saying, they have a blend of experienced players. Some of them played with myself. They're very experienced now, and younger players coming through. I think they can go win it. They have the capacity, they have the quality. They just have to show a lot of character and determination that they want to go get it.
There's a bit of a debate in Nigeria. The coach and the Nigerian Football Federation presidents contradicting opinions and views. Okay. The NFF president says Nigeria should be attending the AFCON to win it. The coach says he does not count his team as one of the favorites.
Like, it's a bit confusing to hear different views, but as a Nigerian, as a former captain, why you go into a tournament not believing you're going to win it? You have players that are very experienced. You've qualified with a game in hand. I also understand what the coach is trying to do. He's trying to downplay the pressure on the players. But I think it's too early for that. The players, if you speak to even the younger ones coming through, they'll tell you they want to go and win it. It is interesting. Players will always want to win games. I think the coach is just trying to downplay it. But I think on this, I'll go with Amaju. Nigeria has the capacity and the potential to go win it.
Very interesting. And that's all the sport, Peter.
Many thanks, Mimi. And Mimi has actually tweeted a picture of herself with Joseph Yobo and that trophy from 2013. She's at Mimosa Fawaz. I'm at Okwache. That's my Twitter handle. You can reach the rest of the team as well on Twitter. I'm at Okwache. But for now, from me, Peter Okwache, and the rest of the Focus on Africa team, have a great weekend. Thanks for watching the program. Goodbye.